the issue of sort of neo-colonialization? Because obviously people that have been left behind in Syria are suffering badly.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I want to highlight, because we were talking about the fact, Mike, that, we deal with the incoming threats. And then once we've dealt with one particular incoming threat, we kind of breathe a sigh of relief and we relax. And I think what happened in Syria demonstrates the length of time that the ruling elite are prepared to wait for their plans to come into effect. And therefore, any pushback can't be relaxed. It has to be maintained. So this is a headline. Turkey is angered by possible French presence on the Syrian border, which, of course, will be in the northeast, where they've been supporting the Kurdish separatists for some time. And then basically, Turkey has strongly rejected a proposal to deploy French troops along the Syrian border to establish a so-called secure zone. And what they basically say is, like, France is a small country. It can't act without the United States. Turkey is feeling very empowered at the moment, both towards Russia and towards the EU, and even, I would say, towards Israel and the US. This, of course, partitioning plan goes back to John Kerry, and it goes back way before that. But let's look at 2016. John Kerry talked about the partition of Syria, which could be part of Plan B if peace talks fail. In 2018, Turkey was already warning France that they could become a target for supporting the Kurdish separatists inside Syria. And then when we look at the fact that Turkey is now pushing for the elimination of the Kurdish-led US-allied Syria Democratic Forces, what he's basically saying is, I'm entitled to northern Syria, and nobody is going to get in and partition that area of the country. He's talking about not partitioning all of Syria. What he's talking about is protecting Turkish interests in the interest of the neo-Ottoman agenda. What we have seen are continued persecutions, particularly of Christians and Alawites, but also, and recently, one of the leaders of the Alawites has actually called for French, French intervention. Now, of course, this goes back to the history of Syria, the Alawite region, which is known to be in the coastal areas, which became part of Syria as a byproduct of the notoriously secret 1916 Sykes-Picot Agreement between France and Britain. It was placed under the French mandate after the end of World War I. And after defeating and evicting the British-backed Syrian King Faisal in 1920, France, in a divide and rule strategy, partitioned Syrian territories into 4 parts, one of which was Latakia, where most of the population was Alawite. And of course, that gave France control over the Levant coastal region. And if we look at, this is basically the French mandate map. You can see the Alawite state in purple. You can see the Aleppo state in the north, which now, of course, is being contested by not only Turkey and France, but also the US and Israel. The state of Damascus, the Druze state in the south. They're very similar to what we're seeing attempted now in Syria. And of course, I mentioned last week, we're seeing the race again between France and Turkey to gain control of the coastal area and the gas reserves off the coast of Syria, very important. And again, people can freeze frame the next map and take a good look, but this is what the Ottoman Empire consisted of, and this is clearly what Erdogan is trying to head towards. The dark brown is the original Ottoman Empire, and the various colors of pink are the areas into which the Ottoman Empire expanded into. The white are basically the vassal states. So again, we can see the direction of travel, both for France, the EU, the US, Israel, Qatar, the Gulf states, and Turkey, by looking at these maps. And this was actually a map that has been produced by the Institute of the Study of War, which shows, again, very clearly the current partitioning. The striping is the area that was called contested Syrian territory. The blue circle is the Al Tanf unlawful US military base. And then you have the various armed factions in yellow in the south and around Al Tanf. some of which, of course, were, let's say, brought together by Russia after the Darar Agreement in 2018, and they formed the 5th Legion, which was the legion that actually invaded Damascus before HTS, but most likely under the control of Israel and the US. You have there also in the brown the coastal region, which includes, as we've mentioned, the Alawite state or the proposed state, but all of that area currently is under the control of the Neo-Ottoman forces, HTS and the Turkmen, who also have controlled the Turkmen, which are the formerly Free Syrian Army in the yellow areas in the north, and then also the Israeli, US, EU project in the purple, which is the SDF. So unfortunately, as I said, we're heading towards what appears to be the increased persecution of minorities in Syria, which will lead to the calls for foreign intervention, which will lead to the partitioning project coming to fruition. So as I said, and I want to finish on that very quickly, we must never relax our resistance. We must never bring down our guard, because while we are relaxing, they are planning and preparing the next steps. And I think, this is an incredibly important lesson that we need to take away from what happened in Syria.
Well, thank you, Vanessa. And I think that's one of the things that I want to talk about a bit more in extra as well. Now, look, what we're going to do is, because Vanessa's segments today were a bit broken up, we will get those edited together. So when Kenny puts out the extracts from that, no, don't apologize. It's not your fault. So when Kenny puts out the extracts, we'll put those out as proper segments, 2 separate segments as they were intended to be in the first place. But we got to leave it there for today. I'm going to say thank you very much to everybody for joining us today. We'll be back if you're a UK Column member in a few minutes for some extra. Welcome Vanessa to the programme. Vanessa, what has David Lammy been up to then?
Well, the usual rank hypocrisy on his tour of the Middle East in increasingly ill-fitting suits, I have to note, in all of his photographs. So first of all, he welcomes Iraq's Prime Minister to discuss, guess what, fighting Daesh or ISIS as we know them in Syria and Iraq. So UK increasing again its involvement and intervention in West Asia, particularly in Syria and Iraq, as they always have done, of course. And of course, we have to remember the UK is funding the ISIS holding camps in the northeast of Syria. And then he bangs on about climate and sustainable energy with the foreign minister. I don't need to add anything to that. Then basically you have him meeting the head of the Palestinian Authority, Abu Mazen or Mahmoud Abbas. And he talks, of course, about the two-state solution in the wake of the so-called ceasefire between Israel and Gaza, and talks about an empowered Palestinian Authority with a very aging Mahmoud Abbas in charge. And of course, recently, there are multiple reports on this, but this is just one from the cradle. Mahmoud Abbas's big gamble to crush West Bank resistance. And of course, there have been attacks by the PA, the Palestinian Authority, on resistance factions and on civilians, particularly in the West Bank. Then Lamy goes on to meet with members of the Zionist regime and the families of the hostages with strong UK links, bearing in mind the UK was providing so-called intelligence and surveillance to try and find the UK-linked hostages in Gaza. The government is using every diplomatic lever and leaving no stone unturned in our efforts to bring Emily and her fellow hostages home. However, of course, what Lamy doesn't mention are the thousands of Palestinian hostages or prisoners that have been taken, over 10,000, both before 7th of October and after 7th of October. And this is just a very short 30-second clip from a longer Euromed Monitor clip showing basically the Zionist forces' arrest of medical staff from the Kamal Adwan hospital in the north of the Gaza Strip, and the arrest of Dr. Hussam Abu Safia, who, according to the investigation and the report, has been taken to Stade Tayman, which is the prison that is notorious for the rape of interned Palestinian civilians who are accused of being part of Hamas. And it goes into great detail about the mistreatment of Dr. Hussam by the Zionist forces. This is not at all addressed by Lamy.
Vanessa, it looks like the connection has been stable for a little bit now. So are you there?
I am. I'm trying it on 4G now. I don't know what's happening with the internet the last 2 days.
Yeah, well done. Well, that is fine. So let's come back on to David Lammy, and he was speaking with the new Syrian foreign minister.
Well, yeah, the foreign minister of the terrorist HTS group, and just to demonstrate, and of course, Lammy is not going to get hit with the Anti-Terrorist Act Section 12 when he returns to the UK, nor are any of the officials from Europe or from the UK, particularly that have been visiting Syria and meeting with HTS, still a proscribed terrorist group in the UK. And if we look at, this was from the Charity Commission back in 2018, where actually they raised the alarm that the humanitarian aid, particularly from the UK, that was going through northern Syria on the border with Turkey at Bab al-Hawa, the fact that crossing was run by HTS, that was deemed a terrorist organization in May 2017. And of course, we know that the hypocrisy will continue and that HTS will effectively be normalized eventually. An article in Le Monde very recently shows that Syria's HTS is a movement that allegedly has de-radicalized from the top. And then if we look at a post on X from David Miller, basically saying he's talking about, as I said, the so-called ceasefire between Gaza and Israel, the argument that, of course, this is purely to make Trump look good, to give Netanyahu the reason that Trump forced him to make the ceasefire, and, of course, to enable normalization with the Gulf states, in particular Saudi Arabia. And David draws attention to the fact that it's not just the Saudis that will Zionize. Syria's already finished. Lebanon and Iraq are on the chopping block. And Jordan and Egypt are expected to cede territory also. That's before we get to the Zionization deals that will be forced onto Pakistan, Malaysia, Indonesia, and others. This is not a ceasefire. It's a way of opening up new theaters now that Gaza has been destroyed. And of course, we've been talking about the Zionization also of Europe, the UK, and the US for some time.